Thank you for joining us today. This was a pretty spontaneous idea that came up in a conversation between Joe Morris and Andrew, and we're really excited that you can all join. I think the motivation for this is that there's so much information kind of pouring down on us. There's so much to take in and to process, and I think we are looking all for some resources to help process this in the right way, for it to kind of help us grow as human beings and not kind of destroy all of us. It's not an easy situation. I'm just excited to hear from all of you how you're dealing with the situation, and maybe you can share some resources. I would just go around the room, the virtual room here, just to maybe you can all say a quick word about who you are and you know, how you're doing right now. Maybe Nobuntu, maybe you could start.
Okay, thank you. I am Nobuntu in South Africa. I'm also trying to figure out myself and the communities around me, faith community in particular, in my family, how to navigate this. But I'm also very grateful for this platform.
So, Nobuntu, you are
introduction? Hello?
Are you in Stellenbosch right now?
No, actually I'm in the car.
Oh, you're in the car. So, but you're in the Cape area in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and you're
I'm
at the university.
I'm in the University of the West of the. I'm in the University of Stellenbosch.
Mm.
And I am the lecturer at the Faculty of Theology, Practical Theology, and my discipline is pastoral care and counseling. And I am, before that, quickly was, and I believe still am, a social community pastoral caregiver or pastoral care practitioner at heart, and I think I will always be. And is that enough introduction?
Yeah, that's great. Andrew?
Sure. My name is Andrew Doss. I am sitting here on a farm in central Louisiana. Some friends of ours are hosting us as we try to semi-quarantine ourselves from New Orleans, which is one of the fastest growing cities with coronavirus in America. Per capita has the highest rate right now. So we drove 3 hours yesterday to get here and have had a little bit of confusion this morning for various reasons. But in any case, I'm an attorney. I finished up seminary a few years ago, and I'm still discerning whether to become a pastor or a priest in the Episcopal Church. So for now, I'm a lay person who's just very concerned about these ideas, and I'm working now for a nonprofit on the future of economics around automation, artificial intelligence, and other changes that are coming, which are suddenly very much upon us as we start working remotely, as we start having to have automated delivery and other things going on this very week. I don't know if we're going to move back into the economy of old ever. And so I'm especially concerned about equity for those who are suffering most right now, who are losing jobs, the most vulnerable of our world. And I'm really looking for community of conversation in the church around how we tend to those most in need.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Joe Morris.
I'm Joe Morris Doss, known better as the father of Andrew. I'm a bishop of the Episcopal Church, and I'm an attorney as well. I've spent a fair amount of my ministry, and in particular the last several years, dealing with the crisis that's going on in American economy and politics, and in the course, at the same time, the crisis that's taking place in the church. I formed an organization called At the Threshold, which was seeking to reform the church or to contribute to the reform of the church. So I thought a fair amount about the crisis of faith in those terms. and I'm very very glad to be able to combine our immediate concern about the crisis, the global crisis of this virus. I was reading just yesterday words of Martin Luther King about in that letter from Birmingham, in which he talked about how the early church gave itself as a colony on earth of heaven during pandemics. The imagery was of a line of villagers leaving the village sadly, while going in the opposite direction was a line of Christians to minister to people inside, to try to save their lives and to bury the dead. And in a crisis like this, the church can't simply send us into the cities, would be in the way. And it hurts my feelings that in a sense I have to run from the city. But there are other ways that Christians respond to this crisis, and we need to figure out how best to do it together. So I'm very pleased to be in this conversation.
All right, thank you very much. My name's Jonas. I live in Munich, Germany right now. We're just on the border of Austria and pretty close to Italy, so we're also pretty close to one of the centers right now. We're all in home office here, so we're all kind of sort of on lockdown. It's not a complete lockdown, but it's close to a complete lockdown. I did study some theology as well, and now work for the public broadcasting service here. So I tried to kind of combine some of those faith questions with now also media and communication issues. And I think right now we're seeing how important it is that we have solid information and that we know how to deal with also the novel environments of digital communication. We're now seeing the great aspects of it right now here in this conversation, that we can have a conversation across continents. We're in Africa, Germany, Europe, Africa, and America at the same time. And that completely changes our perception of space, for instance. And you're all just as affected by the dramatic stories we've heard from Italy or from China, as we are from the stories we hear out of New York or New Orleans or something. So it's a very global reality right now, and I think that's why it's so fitting that we have this group here together. I think this already kind of frames the whole conversation very well. I was wondering if you don't mind, would you maybe share with us just a personal feeling? What's your feeling right now? Because we're all in various different emotional states, and I think just becoming aware of where we're even at right now, I think is not easy, because we might go into a frantic mode or an afraid mode or something. And I was just wondering, how are you guys feeling right now? Nobuntu, what's going on?
As you said, I mean, Africa, South Africa, which is I look at it with different lenses, obviously, from yours. And around me, I see fear. And that's why one of the things that made me excited about this conversation is that, yes, fear is fine when it pushes us to do something, but my concern is that it might paralyzes us, and we get to a point where we're paranoid. And secondly, and that will cause stigma. And for somebody, Jonas, who also worked during the time of HIV and AIDS, which still is better than before, because there is a treatment. I worked there during the time where there was no treatment, and this corona is reminding me of that time, and I'm wondering, and I'm kind of anxious for us as a church not to get to that. Our initial response on HIV, where there was a stigma at the beginning, And because of that, we couldn't effectively, as a church, help. And I'm kind of hoping and praying that before we jump into saving mode, just to reflect back, what have we learned from HIV during the time there was no cure? And what are the lessons that we can, resources, if you may, Jonas, resources that we can get? It doesn't necessarily mean material resources, wisdom-wise, that we can now use to support, I think, as a church, more than anything, is support, solidarity with one another. I think first and foremost, those are the kind of resource that we need to put there. So that's basically where I am looking around, and the inequality of South Africa in particular. Because if we're talking about this isolation, for instance, is that, Andrew, that means there are people that are staying in a one-bedroom shack. That is everything in that. There is it's a sitting room, it's a TV room, it's a kitchen, it's a bedroom, it's everything. So what is the situation there? What would be the situation there? So I'm kind of, gentlemen, on that, just trying to reflect on HIV and the lessons that I think I learned there, and also looking at the situation where, which one is better? That's where, honestly, I am, Jonas. Which one is better? Is this one or HIV? When we're looking at in the inequalities of South Africa.
Wow.
I guess what I'm observing is that one of the things with such a virus is that it really respects no borders, no skin colors, no languages, no nothing. You know, like it's a viral thing that crosses all these artificial barriers that we've built up, and even if we try to segregate our way out of it, we still realize every day now that we're trying to quarantine or trying to lock down. We realize how much social contact we really have. So I guess I'm realizing it just emphasizes how much of a common humanity we have, and I'm hoping that we don't turn to the old recipes of tribalism, that because they really won't work against this. We're already seeing that it's spread across the entire globe. You know, it's on all 5 continents. It's a global pandemic, and so it also just makes us aware of how interconnected this whole planet is, and we can't just isolate from that. It's incredibly hard.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, if I can piggyback off of that for a moment. I've been in a lot of conversation with people about the ways in which, especially in America, our experience is increasingly privatized. And what I mean by that is, it's more easy in America for us to be in conversation with friends across the globe than it is with our neighbors. And we have such a small relationship with the public and with strangers. And I've been in conversation with friends who are not churchgoers and helping them. They've been really surprised to recognize that even when they have strong sense of community, they do not share that strong sense of community with people who they don't know. And the one thing that church offers us, the one thing I can find in church that I can't find anywhere else in my society in America, is that place you go that you don't know everybody and you are in absolute community. And I am worried about what happens in this pandemic when all of our experiences become privatized. And we really are separated from those whom, as Nobuntu is pointing out, are living in a very different life than those of us who are able to be on a computer with friends across the globe. We're really going to be, throughout history, we've already been so blind to the needs of others even when we're actually seeing them in community, in without the church community to be reminding us of that, how do we remind ourselves of those who are outside of our private circles?
You started off talking about fear and our feelings about fear, which is, I think, really the enemy. I remember what one of the United States presidents said, that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And a pandemic can turn us into a fearful global community. And what Christians, I think, have to offer to begin with is this sense that we don't fear even death. We don't fear what's brought to us in this world. Instead, what we do is we take it and make that crisis into an opportunity. Andrew and I have spent a lot of time recently talking about crisis as opportunity. There's an awful lot to be said about each of the things you have said, which I consider absolutely brilliant and grateful. What I'm thinking about is how all of that speaks to the fact that we've got to get to work, not fearfully, but in confidence and hope, and do our job as Christians, which isn't being done everywhere very well.
Yeah, I was. My father was sharing this this little quote. It's this prayer from, I think it's Niebuhr. Help me accept the things that I can't change. Help me solve the problems I can solve, and give me the wisdom to distinguish between the two things. And I think that's exactly the spirit that, as so much information is being shot at us, and we're trying. It's easy to get into this actionism mode. Like, I need to solve something. I need to do something. I need to solve the problem. I need to. And everybody is in this kind of state of fear, and they, it's hard to think straight when you're in fear. And I think that the wisdom, the kind of the ultimate God perspective, or that confidence and hope perspective, I think is what can kind of give you a moment of calm to distinguish between the things that you can change and that you can change, and get to work on those that you can change, and accept the things that you can't change. Because otherwise we totally lose this sense of agency that we need to even also help anyone beyond us. So I do think, it's this classic thing where if you're in good connection with yourself, and you can hear yourself, and you're in a good place with yourself, you can then also go out and help others effectively. So it's not just a moment for care for others, but it is also a moment for self-care, just as a foundation for everything you do in the world.
Right. Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Nobuntu, as our lecturer in practical theology, and especially in pastoral care, thinking about the needs of pastoral care right now, have you found anybody who's able to, whether it's through technology or anything, any avenues for giving pastoral care at this time, or is it still just up in the air as to how people can find the resources to be with each other?
Thank you, Andrew, for that question, because I was watching the news after work last night, and the government was specifically talking to the churches, because this time of the year there is Easter, and the people that are not going to church, they go to church. So our churches becomes full during this time, and it's an opportunity to minister and everything. But now we are not allowed to have more than 100 top gatherings. And it's something that when I listened to it, I was thinking exactly about the technology. And yet again, and I was like, how many people are going to have access to that? And that's when I thought we do need to step back a bit. Because as Jonas said, it's easy to jump and get on, which is a good thing, and get on with few people. But if we can step back and think about the other people that doesn't have technology, because there was a whole lot of things about the television sharing the stage, those churches that have a channel. And I couldn't help but thinking, how many people are going to be having access to that? And as a pastoral practitioner, with this whole isolation and everything, which is the core of what makes us Christian, is touch, is another human being meeting another human being, heart to heart, human to human. And I'm not sure, Andrew, if I did think further than that. I'm still thinking, and this platform is actually helping me to think aloud.
Yeah, I think it points out to a couple of great things that maybe we can continue a little bit. The strand of the digital divide. Basically, you have some people who are very well connected with broadband internet, very fancy devices, and have a lot of ways to communicate. Even though it's not the kind of touch that you so eloquently put at the center of it, but it is at least communication. So we can see each other. We can see the concern in each other's eyes, even though it's not touch, but we're more connected than if we were just, typing messages on WhatsApp or something. So there is something to be said about the inequality of technology that is now kind of reinforcing itself in a moment where technology is the main way to interact and participate in community. And I think that's something that is very important. I hope that anybody who's an internet provider in some way, or a software provider or something, takes this moment seriously as not a way to make profit, but to give people access to participation and community, because the whole society rests on this this foundation. So even if you run a business, then this is not the time to make a profit. This is the time to support the people who usually don't have access to your products. So I think there's a couple of very practical ways that we can now think about this digital divide, and to say, this is the moment to finally close that gap. It's been an inequality for a long time, but this is the moment to invest and to kind of pitch in for all people who have skills in those areas.
Jonas, I agree with
my point there.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, that was my point. Yeah, it's just the kind of inequality of the earlier times are now kind of almost magnified. So a lot of the churches I know, the kind of more mainline traditional churches in Germany, they've been struggling to deal with technology. And in some ways, it's now, we were saying, it could be an opportunity. It is an opportunity for these churches to learn these things. So where the inequality is not the problem, but just the kind of desire to act and the will to learn these things. Now is the moment where every pastor is trying to figure out, how do I do video chats? How do I stream my sermon if I can't preach it to people in person? All those things I do think are an opportunity for some people who have kind of looked down on these ways, kind of take them seriously as at least the best option right now. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I certainly wouldn't quarrel, but part of what I hope we're able to do is to sort out the best ways to use this sort of technology, and the proper relationship between things like proper use of worship and what worship is, and not just kind of throw it down through technology in the same ways and trying to do the same things, but at a distance instead of together. I think we don't have that sorted out very well. And as this crisis struck, I've seen the damnedest things start to develop as people having communion together on streaming live is just so weird to me, and a few other things. So those of you who are great technicians can bring people like me along, not only to improve the quality of the usage and the opportunities, but to sort out what's appropriate, what works best, and what that which doesn't work, and even that which doesn't work at all.
I guess that brings up another question, a generational question. I was thinking, especially, the people who are now kind of isolated most are people who do not know how to use technology or somehow feel uncomfortable with it, which is usually more in the elderly generations. They're also more in danger of being lonely. So I think loneliness and those questions, have been pervasive actually in all our societies for decades now. It's a part of modern life almost. But I think this situation just makes that very clear. The moment you don't have those regular interactions at the store, at the bank, at the, everybody goes to online delivery and so forth, then suddenly there's even less interaction. So I'm thinking about loneliness, and I do see that that's a huge role for the church right now. That like the government is in charge of public safety, of the medical system maybe, and so forth. But there's a few things that the church is there for, and not the state. So maybe I'm wondering also, what are those distinct things that the church is now called to, and not any other entity? Well, we've described the tasks.
Well, as a representative here of the elderly, I can assure you you're saying is true and accurate about the inability of those of us who didn't grow up with the wire. We are not capable in the same way, and we will get. It's a frustrated loneliness that you're talking about, and there's just no question about this reality. And there's a question in my mind that we need to sort out. Part of what this conversation is about, at least for me, is to sort out what Christians can do that is special for people who have our attitude. So much of the church is trivialized, even by those of us who are doing it, trying to live Christian lives. So the church it's one more thing some people are doing, and isn't it interesting or not? And it just gets trivialized for the power of what it really is. And this is going to force us to focus on what it is that's life-giving, that's a matter of life and death, that we really have to bend to and contribute to, even at some risk.
Ubuntu, you started saying something. Does that relate somehow?
It is kind of related, but I think it's also, I want to put it out there to you so that you can just help me from the outside eye, objectively, because maybe I'm not looking at this objectively. In Africa, in South Africa, where I'm in particular, the technology has been there, but there are people that technology is still now, as I'm speaking to you, is a luxury. And so they haven't been isolated, because now they've got their little technology. They can connect with whoever they want to connect with. And I was thinking about those kind of people, that how do we utilize, other than the smaller groups, because we cannot meet, but the smaller groups of 10 that can just meet for solidarity, and hope. Because I think we need to wake up every morning, and in the midst of this. And one thing that does wake us up is hope. And so if technology online, what we're doing now is luxury to many people, then how do they in isolation wake up? I'm just now thinking aloud, and I'm not objective in this.
Yeah.
So I'm trusting from the outside eyes to looking in, because I'm part of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I guess we need to have a whole new radar for the world around us. We need to start suddenly seeing people that before we'd kind of ignored, and we just went about our busy lives, and suddenly we see, there's this other person that I've never actually even had connection to, and so forth. So maybe this is a chance also to take stock and map your world again to kind of see who are the people that we've left behind. So instead of seeing it as an added danger, it could be this moment of centering, self-centering kind of, and refocusing, and maybe we need to wake up to see the people that that are around us, and then we need to somehow figure out how to reach out. And that's the hard part right now, that we can't, even if we have knowledge, then this person, I remember this person, we need to go there now, and you realize it's not going to happen. Or
No.
I mean, for you, maybe currently it's still okay to have these interactions on a kind of a small group basis and so forth. But for us right now, it's basically, they've said, no social contact. And that, I think, there's a whole level of pain that comes with that we maybe also need to just verbalize. And before, even if we can't do anything about it, maybe we just need to say, like, hey, we are social human beings. This is a real crisis. This is really going to be really painful, because we need each other, and we need human beings, and the touch that you were describing. So at least maybe through, I'm thinking through storytelling, through conversation, through doing what we're doing right now, seems like that's the closest we'll get to some of these things for a while. Maybe Nobuntu, maybe what do you think about that? The storytelling aspect, like, at least even if we don't physically see each other, we do have ways to tell stories through writing, through drawing, through audio, through technology. So it doesn't even need to be only the kind of high tech stuff, but just medium expression through different types of media somehow. Like,
I agree, because we can use the technology in that way to share those stories, that some of those stories people understand, people know, and they evoke hope.
I'm wondering, what's the role of art right now? Artists, all the events are being canceled. all these great artists that we all love and want to see in person. I feel like this is almost their time to shine and to help guide us. There's this Plato quote: "Poets are the secret lawgivers of life." I think the stories we tell right now, and the artists, I think they're a key in this time somehow. I don't know how, but.
And also the looking back, Jonas.
Yeah, just continue. Sorry.
Are we cool?
Megan was just saying we can invite more people into the conversation people, I'll just say that again, people, whoever is on board here, just feel free to ask a question or there's this question tool here down there, and at the bottom of the screen you have ask a question. So maybe I can, Megan just asked a question here. You can do that too. So if let's just like try to open this up for whoever wants to participate. Either give a comment in the chat column or ask a question that we can answer on screen. Megan asked the question for the pastors. What are the best examples from your past experience of how to come together at such a time as this? Does this compare to anything you lived through before? Nobuntu, maybe you can expand a little bit on the HIV experiences that you were that you kind of teased a little bit. I feel like there's some interesting things there. What was that like in the time before you had antiretroviral treatment? What was that time like? You know, anticipation, I guess, for a cure, but can you maybe just share a bit more?
That's the point I was going to get onto when we were talking about the stories, that we can look back to the journey we've been through, the HIV journey, and how did we come to the point where we are now, and how God brought us up to this far. I mean, the Bible continuously talking about remember, and I think, as I said before, Jonas, that before we jump into and trying to be super heroes and super heroes, we need to step back a little bit and get into this wisely, because my worry is that there was a lot of judgment with HIV and stigmatization and everything. With this one, it's globally as HIV. It got a potential of stigmatization. So if we actually look at how we did that with a few people, that because the HIV pandemic, from my context and my experiences, it was the people that have HIV that were finding comfort to each other. Mm-hmm. And with this one, we're not even allowed to meet physically. So I think technology, it's where it can be utilized. It can where to be utilized to meet and talk, but I'm not sure how many of those people that are needed most will be able to do that. But I think looking back to the journey of HIV, it was the hope that one day there will be something. And the hope happened because there were people holding hope for each other. Hope doesn't happen. That is now my opinion. Hope doesn't happen alone. It happens because we are together and we holding it for each other. And that is what I learned from working with the women that were together with the HIV. And I think in the long run, as this pandemic unfolds, I think we will see how to navigate that. I'm not saying it will be the same, but I think we are called by this to think outside the box.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with this. I don't have any past experience. I just read this in books, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer is one of the people that I've studied who've experienced some of these existential challenges that, in the Nazi time in Germany, he experienced almost like it was viral thoughts that infected everybody. And so he was trying to, keep a clear mind and work in the resistance as a theologian. And he has this little piece, nugget that I wanted to share, which which is, he says, God doesn't give us all the knowledge. God gives us just as much, or all the support. God at once. God gives us, like, gives it in piecemeal, basically, so that we can get through the challenge that is in front of us, but that we don't forget that we don't produce this by ourselves, but that we do it by God's grace and with God's support. And so maybe that's the spirit that we can learn from other people who've come through some of these experiences. They've stayed persistent, persistently hopeful, despite the fact that everything around them told them to despair. And so I'm wondering, what are those sources of kind of deep down in us? What are those sources of, like almost like counterfactual hope? Because the hope it's almost like it's like a choice. It's not something that is super obvious from the environment that we like from what we see, but it's something that it's an act. It's an act of hope. Nobuntu, you've had the privilege to spend some time with Desmond Tutu. I'm thinking also of Bishop Tutu. I don't know if you have any thoughts that come up from Desmond Tutu's experience that somehow are fitting for this moment and the question of hope that you point to.
Because he always talks about we as much as we did what we were supposed to do for the apartheid, because that's where he's speaking normally from, but we did pray and trust that it is going to change, and the resilience that is the resource that are within. And I'm again saying that it comes out very strongly when we're doing it together. When we resist together, it comes out very strongly in the midst of no hope. But together we can. And the solidarity.
The question is then how do we foster this spirit of solidarity and the spirit of togetherness, because that's then the key to finding that solid hope that we need. Yeah.
One of the things that's always struck me about Desmond's point of view, I mean, every time I've ever been around him, it just what comes out so importantly for me is the way his hope is grounded in some kind of deeper assurance than can just be produced by anything other than trusting God's work in the world. I remember a speech he gave. It wasn't a speech, it was at a reception back in 1982. And he was saying how he felt sorry for the people who were oppressing and who thought that they were going to control anything, because in God's good time, the people there were going to be free. And God was the will of God for apartheid to end, and for then the aftermath that he realized would be so difficult would work its way the way God's plan, not God's plan, excuse me, but God's will and determination has always taken us forward. He, in his way that he was giggling, he had a milk punch in his hand and he said, and by the way, this is the best milk punch I've ever had. But he got this across in such a profound way. It's always what struck me, he has to say. And in my own personal experience, the civil rights movement back in the late 50s through the 60s, it caused me to look back and realize that that's such an important feature, to realize the whole story of God's people from the very beginning, the way we started, right on through every crisis, is if we stick with God, we're going to come out of this, and we're going to be moving forward in the way that God's will moves forward.
Yeah, I thought about that when Nobuntu earlier said, let's the remember part. In the Hebrew Bible, it always says, remember what God has done for you, instead of focusing on the challenge ahead of you. Focus on how far you've already come, and from what a good, solid, strong place you can engage this challenge ahead of you. I think that's the wisdom that comes from zooming out to scale. Kind of you zoom out to the bigger picture, and you realize, wow, I'm alive. Thank you. You start there. Creation is all around us, and we have all these communities and all these opportunities that we sometimes don't see just in front of us, but they're there. And so a spirit of curiosity and maybe even experimentalism, like we're doing right now. We're doing this thing here for the first time. The crisis triggered some curiosity about each other in us. So we joined this conversation because of this moment, and got to experience all these thoughts together. So one point I want to bring in from Tyler, who is tuning in from Norway. Tyler said a couple of minutes ago, he's listening in from Norway, and he's thanking for the conversation, trying to find good ways to speak about everything here with small children who know something scary happening outside, but they can't quite understand things. He says it seems to be too simple to say that their parents and God are looking out for them when their daily realities actually, and much of their stability, is just turned upside down for now. How I mean, I have the little one just next room here. How do we speak with children in this moment? I mean, for me, it's been interesting because I'm now in home office. I'm forced to be home, and all my breaks I can spend with him. And so actually he's profited from the togetherness. And suddenly I realize, oh man, I'd do any day home office. I just want to be around him. But at the same time, for kids who are bigger, they go to kindergarten or to school, and now they're kind of cut off from all their social networks. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts.
My only first thought on this is, I think kids have a much stronger capacity to deal with reality than adults do in a lot of ways. I think it's very important. They can handle it if we can talk very honestly with them about the situation. They'll actually be much more adaptive than we will. And I have found in pastoral care that it's often where we feel we have to protect children, it's actually us trying to protect ourselves. So I think that children, the more we can explain to them and help them see what's happening, the more safe they will actually feel. They'll feel less safe when they feel like there's something not being shared with them.
And also, Andrew, when we have this fear, because they sense it.
That's right.
They sense that fear. So it doesn't matter how you speak to them. If they sense that fear, they won't relax. And I agree with Andrew. They're very resilient, but we need to assure them, not only by saying, but by living it, the peace, transferring the peace to them than fear.
I think what both of you said is so important. One, they can smell your fear. So you've got to get, you and your community have to be able to, perhaps with less facility, as Andrew said, than the child who does this more naturally. We have to be able to get through whatever it is that's causing us to fear in a way that they can sense, the way that they can feel, the way that they can smell. And what Andrew was saying is, you want to, right now there are two things in my mind. You want to do good parenting. Do this the same way you would do if you were disciplining the child. If you were sharing it regularly, you get down on the child's level and treat them like an adult. You don't baby them. you act like that you have to talk a little differently. You have to use different language, but or different metaphors or what have you. But you're treating them like like you would treat another adult, because if we treat them as childish, we will not get across. And the other thing I would say very quickly, and I want to thank our friend from Norway for coming in and joining us with this conversation. If the community is doing that same job, then the effect is exponential, and the children will protect each other if there's a community of adults and of the whole families coming together. That's the power, whether it's on technology or whether it's in gathering at church or however you do it. The sense of the community talking to that child is so important. It's not all on the parent, it's on each other.
I guess that brings me to another question that I'd pose to all of you. Joe Morris, you just said, don't baby them. I was wondering if that's maybe a good advice even for leadership generally right now. Because, there's a couple of people who are in pretty exposed positions, some at the kind of big global level in government, some in hospitals right now, others in their community. Teachers are trying to be leaders from back home somehow, and somehow get these kids through the year, even though it's very different from what they were trained for. I think a lot of people are in these positions that they have never quite found themselves in, that somehow some type of leadership is required of them in a situation that is full of uncertainty. What are some of your, I guess, leadership lessons that you've learned, or, maybe mistakes that we've all made that could instruct us for this specific moment? Nobuntu?
I'm trying to think. There are different kinds of leadership, and that brings us all to being a leader in our own rights, in our own spaces, and that also depends on the spaces one lead.
Mm-hmm.
But in my little experience of leadership, in my spaces of influence, the mistake I made is to think that, particularly at the early stages of HIV, where the people of the community I was working in were looking to me for praying miracles, to not show that you also afraid, you also angry with God, and you also don't know. And that is vulnerability that the people trust. I think the people trust that way more than the opposite, because they find in you a community of human beings that are also very messy in the midst of that.
In terms of leadership, I've always felt like the key is vision, that you're able to communicate. That first of all, for the community you're leading through your leadership, not necessarily because you produce it, but you set it up in a way, you do your part as a leader in a way that the community can gain a vision which they believe in and trust and use going forward. Now, I've had an experience where I failed at doing that very dramatically. I'd like to think that it wasn't all my fault, as they say, but the leading of a people who don't have that vision or don't somehow get it is impossible. And so you've got to somehow help them in whatever way it occurs to have that in order to be what they should be to each other. to go forward as a community instead of individuals connected.
What I'm hearing also is that it's something constructive. It's not just enough to be managing the existing or to responding to the moment, but actually have something that goes beyond this that people can kind of rally around. So even when people have different opinions about how to get there, they have something that they can agree on that can move people forward together. Yeah. Andrew, a thought you have?
I'm more reflecting on the fact that I'm just feeling so grateful for this conversation and hungry. This is feeding a hunger that I'm realizing I'm not even finding in church, where we go in and we kind of, have routines and habits of the level at which we have dialogue and the particular types of dialogue we have. And this feels, I'm just feeling myself swelling with recognizing a hunger that's being fed here just by being in conversation about this. And so I'm thinking that leadership right now calls for us to find the things that we're most hungry for.
Mm-hmm. And to, I guess, identify that in other people and say like, hey, if you want to join, here's an opportunity. Here's a space for conversation. I think maybe this is where we leave it at. It's been an hour. I think it's a good moment to make a comma. It's not a full stop. It's a comma. We'll continue this conversation. Unfortunately,
I am curious if I can interrupt you for one moment, Jonas. I am curious because I know there's 11 people on here. I'm not sure if everybody's been able to actively listen or if they have in the background while they're doing other things or what, but I'm curious if anybody's able to comment before we close it off about what they're hungry for and whether this fed anything for them. Especially, it's very different, obviously, as a person who's on the video camera than somebody just following along. Just if I could just survey you all out there to just tell us what worked, what would you wishing was different. I don't know. I just want to offer that quick moment in the next couple of minutes. If you can make a little comment, that'd be great.
So I'm just testing this. I'm testing this poll function here. I don't know if this worked. Maybe you can all just check if you go to the poll section down here. Yeah, it looks like I got a vote here. I'm wondering if is there a way I can have an open-ended thing? Maybe I can ask a question. This is like we're in live. We're testing out this all the features here. I think here. What are things you are hungry for? Just ask that question. It's now in the question section, and I think people can just comment here. So yeah, so it's great that we get this opportunity, and that what are the 11 people have joined just to test out all these functions here. And if you have feedback afterwards, that'd be great, and then we can keep improving these things. I think 1 hour is a good section. I think I don't see any answers yet. It's probably not so easy to just like come up with this, because I think people might have to kind of ruminate on this a little bit. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just have a tab open or a communication place where you can just give your thoughts after you've had some time to process and digest the conversation, and then we'll use that as feedback to set up the next call sometime soon.
I know that Nobuntu is going to pray us out, but she's disconnected, it looks like.
Yeah, unfortunately, we seem to have lost her here. Maybe the cell reception or something fell off. Andrew, would you want to end us with a prayer?
Sure. God, at this time of great confusion and desire, at this time in which the most vulnerable will be made more vulnerable, the most invisible will be made more invisible, help us and guide us as a people, as a church, as a common body across the world, to keep you in mind and to keep those of us in our community in mind who are most in need of knowing they belong. If we cannot touch physically right now, or if we are limited in our capacity to touch, help us to find ways of touching each other that invoke faith and peace rather than fear. Help us to find ways of being together even when we are apart. We ask you prayers, especially as we meet across continents, for guidance in how we, on this call, and in those of us who've been joining us, how we can be leaders in our lives and continue this conversation in ways that can really grow and feed the hunger of so many. In Christ's name, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Andrew. All right. Joe Morris, Andrew.
Thank you, Jonas, for all of this. Thank you all for being a part.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, for the question. Thank you, Megan, for the question. Thank you, everybody else who's been listening in. It's been a huge privilege to have you on board here. And I'll also say thank you to Nobuntu after this call to thank her for coming on board from South Africa. What a great resource.
But Jonas, thank you for your role here. I won't go into elaborate, but thank you for your role.
Of course. It's been a privilege. Thank you, guys.
Hasta luego.